Welcome to the Hudson Institute. I'm Brian Clark. I'm a senior fellow here at the Institute, and I'm the director of the Hudson Institute Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. Thank you all for being here, both in person and online. Today, we've got a great opportunity to hear more about what's going on in the world of software in the DoD, as well as how it's supporting operational innovation. I think one thing we've learned over the last several years in Ukraine and elsewhere is that warfighting is quickly changing, and that software is becoming a much more central component of future military operations. This week, the U.S. DoD released the China Military Power Report, which highlighted the challenge that U.S. forces will face in dealing with China, a peer competitor. Increasingly, U.S. forces will have to rely on operational innovation and their technical advantages to gain an edge against an opponent like China that has a mass and a geographic advantage over us. So as we think about how the U.S. forces and their allies begin to position themselves for the future, we should think about the role of software and the role of operational innovation in supporting that level of military advantage. So for that discussion today, we've got several folks, or two folks, from the DoD's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Dr. Radha Plum will be speaking first. And then we'll have a fireside chat with me and Margie Palmieri, who is the Principal Deputy Director, our Principal Deputy Chief Digital and AI Officer. I'm sorry. That's right. And I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so this is as loud as I'm able to talk. But Dr. Plum, who we're very honored to have with us today, came to the job of CDAO earlier this year from being the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And previous to that, she had been the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Outside of the DoD, she has an experience in the tech world also, where she was the Director for Research and Insights for Trust and Safety at Google, and she also worked at Facebook previous to that. So I would like to, I'll get the opportunity to hear from Dr. Plum about where she sees the role of software and operational innovation going in DoD going forward. So CDAO's initiatives, or during its 4 years of existence, and kind of where she wants to take the organization going forward. So Dr. Plum, thank you for being here today, and I'll turn over to you and try to nurse my voice over here.
Well, first of all, thank you, Brian, for having us and for fighting through your cold to provide such a nice, warm introduction. And really greetings to everyone gathered here, both in the room and dialing in virtually. Really appreciate folks taking time, especially right before the holiday season picks up. I was at a holiday breakfast at my kids' school this morning, so I know there are many competing activities of all sorts. We're joining you here today just about a week after we announced the launch of the AI Rapid Capability Cell inside of CDAO as the sort of latest step in the department's journey to prototype, field, and scale AI across the department. But I wanted to put some of the organizational pieces in context to talk about the mission and execution, because I think actually in a form follows function kind of way, CDAO is really in and of itself a manifestation of the journey the department has been on. So the CDAO is relatively new, about 3 years old, but its elements actually span administrations and span over a decade of work, right? So the CDAO was built from a number of different elements: the Defense Digital Services, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, the Chief Data Office, the Advana Office, and Project Maven elements. And those pieces came together because over the last decade, in varying forms, varying administrations, different leaders have all recognized one critical thing, which is that the department has a critical mission to do two things: beat bureaucracy and support our warfighters. And digital solutions really have to form the backbone of that in that context, just as they do in every other context of our personal and professional lives. So over the past decade, these different organizations, the Defense Digital Service, demonstrating the power of software-centric applications inside the department, the JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Cell, proving out the transformative impact of AI-enabled capabilities, Project Maven, showing that specifically in the context of specific warfighting function, the Chief Data Officer really driving data as a strategic asset, and Advana really showing the power and promise of data infrastructure and analytic products in driving organizational transformation, better decision-making from the enterprise to the edge. So in that context, walking into CDAO really is a manifestation of how these pieces need to fit together. The policy and enabling functions like acquisition, the data infrastructure at the enterprise level that needs to form the backbone of what we're doing, and then these pilots and innovations that really need to prove out the promise and have the opportunity to scale to impact. And Brian did a great job teeing up Margie, who'll come up right after me, to talk through a number of the specifics on this. But I want to anchor on just two examples, really, because we're in the holiday season and we have our own anniversaries inside CDAO. And December is unique because it marks both 12 months since the Deputy Secretary declared our CJAD C2 minimum viable capability. I'll talk more about that in just a second. And also 6 months since we announced our Open DAGIR initiative. So as I think back on CDAO and kind of what the promise and progress of the organization has been and where it needs to go, I think these are really two critical examples. So let me start on Open DAGIR and work backwards to the min viable capability. On Open DAGIR, I launched Open DAGIR when I came into CDAO, in part because we realized as a CDAO, taking some of the lessons from that min viable capability delivery, that the department had to change the way we acquire digital capabilities. And that was because the way we acquired things limited the department to large scale, very expensive infrastructure and applications that were vertically integrated and from a very small number of vendors. Simply put, the acquisition processes we use to buy digital products that are intended was the same that we used to buy ships and tanks and ammunition, and those are just not the same things we buy. We don't buy those things in the same way. The best analogy I can give is, imagine if I told you were going to get an iPhone, we were going to take 30 years to do a system engineering design on it, it was going to have 5 apps, but you could use those 5 apps for 30 years. You would not want to buy my phone, and I would not be a successful company. On the other hand, if I asked you to come live in a room and I was going to build you a mansion, but I was going to do it in agile 90-day sprints, and you could just live in the room and I would build out the rooms around it and it was all going to be fine, you would not wish to live in my house. So we have to buy these different types of products, these hardware and software solutions, in different ways. And recognizing that, we developed Open DAGIR, which was really intended to do a couple of things. The first was break apart the acquisition of core digital infrastructure and the data backbone from the applications riding on top of the infrastructure, right? You want to buy your phone and you want to buy your apps, and you should be able to add more apps to your phone. And when you change phones, you ought to be able to port your apps to your new phone. Same is true for your technology stack. You ought to have your development environments and data infrastructure, data management, be able to be separated from and add or subtract applications as needed. Second was that open architecture meant that the government needed to have a way to deploy third-party application development that was developed and created distinct from the actual data infrastructure. And third was we needed a clear and predictable process by which that happened. That is, we do experimentation. Those experiments have some assessment criteria. If you meet the criteria, there's a pathway to scaled production level contracts and what that looks like and the expectations for that. So really, Open DAGIR was built with these principles in mind, and those principles allowed us to connect some of the speed acceleration work we did in terms of developing applications through these 90-day experimentation cycles with scaled deployment. That brings me to our min viable capability and why that's such a critical example. So let me just a little bit of background there. Last December, Deputy Secretary Hicks declared a min viable capability for combined joint all-domain command and control. That's really the system we use to integrate all of our data in a way that allows commanders to make the strategic and operational decisions they need to on force flows, force deployment, and kill chain execution. Consistent with that, with the min viable capability, we in CDAO had embarked on a 12-month-long really process to every 90 days do these experiments, GIDE they're called, Global Information Dominance Experiments, to test those digital solutions with warfighters on real operational data. And those parts are really important because what made it an actual capability was that it was a digital solution that warfighters actually wanted to use to do a thing they really needed to do, and they wanted to have it rather than their traditional, more manual workflows. That meant that we had really gotten onto something, and that something then was at a handful of locations and needed to scale. What DAGIR allowed us to do was take that digital solution and connect it to an acquisition pathway, right? So we connected it to enterprise level licenses that could scale to combatant commands, along with a parallel pathway for prototypes and experimentation for new applications that could be further deployed, tested in future GIDE exercises, which we do right now, and then where appropriate, scaled into those same enterprise licenses for digital solutions. So the intent and what we have done over the next subsequent 12 months was really taking that and turning it into practice, getting those enterprise licenses, providing them to combatant commands. That has been roundly positively received. And then the second piece was creating those GIDE experiments and the prototype pathway to test new applications. That pathway is so important because applications we develop, for instance, to deal with activity in the Middle East and in the Red Sea can provide important digital solutions that can then be leveraged in other contingencies, for example, hurricane response here at home, right? So that iterative 90-day cycle allowed us to develop new applications, new solutions, and then for ones that were useful, scale them back into the enterprise level work. That speed to scale pathway is something that uniquely CDAO is able to do because we have the speed functions that I mentioned, those experimentation and technology prototyping activities, along with the scaled infrastructure, and then the enabling functions, both the policy and the acquisition, to translate solutions into scaled capabilities. Let me close by kind of returning to where I started on the discussion of kind of the AI Rapid Capability Cell and what you guys should look for from the CDAO in the coming 6 months, 6 to 12 months. So what we've learned in CDAO is having the warfighter-informed continuous capability delivery, or I should say user-informed continuous capability delivery through our global information dominance experiments and through our broader work with combatant commands and other functional community leads inside CDAO has really illustrated the value of seeding our users, our data infrastructure teams, and our experts together to create solutions. Over time, that needs to grow to create scaled capabilities, not just in digital and analytic solutions, but also AI solutions. That's where we are today. The AI Rapid Capability Cell is an effort to do just that, to build the development environment, starting with 2 of our cloud service providers, to prioritize areas of focus for experimentation through the 14 areas split among business enterprise transformation functions and warfighting functions, and then the experimentation series, again through GIDE, as well as through our partnerships with functional communities through Advana, to create that iterative do loop to identify where AI, and in particular generative AI, serve the highest return on investments, and then create those pathways to scale through our upcoming multi-vendor IDIQ contract in the AI and analytics space, and our both strategic command and control and enterprise edge data integration services contracts to really deploy those at scale to the force. Let me end by saying, look, it's no secret that I was just joking before I walked in, that I will not be the one sort of in the seat for the next 12 months. I will get to take some naps and have some colorful drinks. But the rest of CDAO is really, they're a cadre of career and technical experts, and they've got the mission to carry this on. I think it's going to be a terrific ride to watch them continue this experimentation, development, and deployment series. And really, this has to be a partnership, as it has been for the last 2 years, for the next 2 to 4 years, to get this off the ground. The expertise in this area resides outside of the government. The government's role is to create those bridges into and connect to those operational users, whether they're on the battlefield or in our enterprise analytics, our enterprise functional communities, and then translate those digital solutions into impact for the department. I expect the next 4 years to really be dispositive in the AI space on how that translation into the Department of Defense areas happen. And I couldn't be more excited to see what the team does, leveraging that enable, speed, and scale function to really deliver capabilities for the department. So maybe I'll stop there and let you guys get on with your fireside chat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Plum. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being here today and taking the time to see us on your with that, thank you, Dr. Plum, for being here. I'd like to call up Margie Palmieri, who's the Principal Deputy Director over the Chief Digital and AI Office. We'll talk a little bit about implementation of some of the ideas that Dr. Plum just discussed. So thank you for, oh, here, I'll go.
Yeah, I can do that one, sorry.
That's right. So, all right. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to step back a little bit, Radha just talked about a lot of the initiatives that you guys have going on with GIDE and with the work on CGIDE C2 and also the Open DAGIR and now looking at the rapid AI cell. So
a couple things.
just a couple things going on. But to step back and say, it seems like software has really become, kind of a central driver of warfighting from what we've seen overseas as well as what's happening within the department here. So you came to the CDAO from the Navy's Digital Warfare Office. And you've been working in that field for quite a while, actually, since you left the CNO's personal staff. In that decade, how have you seen the role of software in warfighting change?
Yeah, okay, so a decade would be like 2014-ish,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of remember where I was. At that point, working on the Navy staff, I was one of the requirements and resource sponsors for the Distributed Common Ground System Navy, or DCIGS. This was around, like, probably after the time we started seeing lots of unmanned sensors, lots of new space-based sensors. Rand did a report. I remember Isaac Porsche, we went back and forth, wrote a paper called The Data Flood. I mean, this was, what are we going to do with all this data coming in, largely ISR focused. And we were going to modernize DCIGS in the Navy to be more software driven. We recognized that we were going to need more flexible capabilities to come in over time. And so we used his report. We wrote a new program baseline, DCIGS Increment 2, and we tried to get it through CAPE, and they wouldn't approve the cost model because the RDTD went up and it never went back down. And we're like, right, but it's software, so you continue to invest in software over time, and it never quite goes away. And they're like, that's not how programs work. Programs ramp up and then they ramp down. And we're like, yeah, but okay, that's great. And then we tried to explain the concept of how we were going to have distributed capability forward in a DDL environment, but it was going to link back up to a cloud when it had connectivity. Think about a carrier in distributed ops, and this was just, you can't put a cloud on a carrier. Well, right, you can't put a cloud on a carrier, but you can have the carrier sync up with the cloud, and it was both on the operational side and on the program side. It was just a completely foreign concept to even think about how to implement software. And I remember the Defense Innovation Board did a bunch of software studies at the time. And okay, so we've come a long way since then, which is really good. We have software acquisition pathway. We understand how to fund these programs now, but we still have a couple challenges still. One of the big ones is, we can do a lot with software, but it is directly connected to users. That's how they do their work. And so the workflow changes when you start to introduce digital tools. And it's not that it's hard for the military, but it takes some back and forth because our users are so well trained and they're trained on the systems they have. And when you make a software update or you introduce new software, it fundamentally changes the way they work. And so you have to have a training component coupled with it. So in GIDE and other things that we do, we make sure that the users and the developers are side by side and they get a chance to talk to each other about how to develop a program intuitively and how to also make sure that they know exactly how to do it. We also still have challenges with how industry accesses our data. So the Open DAGIR initiative that Dr. Plum talked about is designed to free our data so that we can have more software companies come in and be able to develop on top of our data. And then we are still in CDAO working with the CIO side on authority to operate and how we get companies faster access to our networks. And we haven't even touched on the AI side, which just takes software to the next level. So I'll just stop there.
So a couple of interesting points there. One is the workflow, different with software-centric capabilities versus hardware-centric. And the department's not used to that. The department is used to a linear process by which somebody back in the Pentagon predicts what the future force will need.
We're so good at it.
We know better than you, and so we're going to tell you what you need in 10 years. To this more iterative model where the capability development is cycling with the operator and they're kind of co-evolving the tactics with the capabilities. So how do you?
And just real quick, and in 2014, we thought that was a 1 to 2 year cycle. And with GIDE, we do it every 90 days. So yeah.
Right. And in Ukraine, they say they do it every 2 weeks.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, which seems like that's the way for the future. In that environment, though, how do you create the I guess the structure so that a set of operators in the field who are, I guess, doing tactics development and maybe experimentation can directly interact with industry people who are now out there in the field with them, and then have that be paid for and have an appropriate acquisition oversight so people in Congress feel like they're not just throwing money at some kind of open-ended experimentation effort.
Yes, absolutely. It is structured. The first thing is we have key mission threads that we look at that we know are pain points for our operators. We know they are manual. We know they involve swivel chairs from one system to another. The data is not digitized. We're doing PowerPoint course of action development. Those are the ones where we're like, we can be better, and we should take a digital thread. We should look at, do we want more targets? Do we want more timely recommendations? Do we want more diverse options for our decision makers? And those mission outcomes really drive how we first, what data do we look at connecting? What software do we build? Who are those users that we need to bring into the conversation? And then we have a couple key back-end government-owned contractor-operated data platforms that we have through Open DAGIR created the ability for third-party application developers to come in, develop on top of the data. Another company runs the infrastructure for us. We're not great at running infrastructure in the government. Our refresh rates are not as quick with the POM cycle. But through that, we can now partner larger industry and smaller industry together to get those cycles. And then through experimentation, whether it's in a GIDE or whether it's in a micro experiment somewhere, take a piece of that mission thread, test out, okay, how fast was it before? How fast is it now? Does this mission thread work? Are there other pieces we need to look at? And then a lot of times we find, policy blockers or other types of blockers that either we will take on in CDAO or we'll pass to somebody else in the department to tackle.
So, which all of this brings up the work that you guys have done on combined joint all-domain command and control, JADC2, has really been focused a lot on the command and control part of it. And I think a lot of times CJADC2 is perceived as being a communications effort. I wouldn't say program, but an effort to try to improve communications. But it's really about improving command and control. So in what you've been doing there, it seems like you've been working both at the kind of high operational level with GIDE and looking at supporting combatant commanders, but also down to the tactical level in terms of supporting individual units trying to do command and control. Has that been true?
Yeah, I mean, JADC2, it's a whole department effort. When we first came in and the deputy asked us to take a look at what we could add to the JADC2 space, we said, okay, first of all, let's not go duplicate anything anybody else is doing, right? We want to put taxpayer dollars where it makes sense and get a whole unity of effort piece there. And as we started going around talking to folks, we realized everybody had a role in it in some way. The services were really focused on the operational, the tactical level, the last tactical mile, how we do targeting of weapons. The intel community was really interested in how to present intelligence in a meaningful and tactically relevant way. We had the CIO focus on the network side, the mission partner environment side. We had combatant commands in their own functional and geographic domains, trying to solve challenges that they had there. Joint staff was actually looking at their global integration role and how to bring all the people together. And as we went down the list, we started to create a slide because we love slides in the department. And we're like, here's what everyone's doing. And once everyone saw the slide, they were like, but I'm also doing this. And I want to be on the slide. And then we were like, wow, this actually is the entire department has a piece of this from the policy all the way down to the capability development. And it really did exist from the strategic side back in the Pentagon where the SecDef makes decisions around which forces to send to which theater and what is one decision today to move a force due to its long-term readiness and what does that look like? Down to the operational level in terms of, okay, now I've been assigned forces as a combatant command, how do I position them, how do I task them, to the tactical level of what weapons am I shooting and how do I look at reload. So through a bunch of different partners we've had from the joint staff to OSDR&E to the combatant commands to the services, we first focused on the combatant command level because there really wasn't a lot of work in that space, and a lot of the COCOMs were trying to solve this problem by themselves. And our first initial round, I'd say in 2023, was really focused on how do we digitize some of their processes. And so that was number one. But then we were wondering, like, okay, so if the combatant commands have these digital plans and they have this ability to now look at logistics feasibility compared to Blue Force options, how does that get communicated down to the tactical level? Is it PowerPoint, right? And we drew a couple digital threads out to key weapons in the Indo-Pacific, and we're able to identify, where are those key blockers, and whether it's network side or a lot of it's on the data side that we had to put in place. And we worked really closely with the service JADC2 efforts. So this is Project Overmatch and C3BM in the Air Force and Project Convergence in the Army to try to link together that operational and tactical level and make sure we've got a digital thread there.
Which highlights a couple of things on command and control that you guys are doing, which is new. I mean, which the department hasn't done very well in the past. So one is this perspective look at the implications of current courses of action for future options, future courses of action, and then also this idea of adaptable command and control, meaning if my comms availability is not perfect, I need to think about my command and control relationships changing based on my communications availability. Rather than building a communications network that supports my desired hierarchical structure.
Yes, and so much of it's been interesting as we do this because the initial response was like, yes, but if everyone can see the data, then won't everyone take action on it? And it's like, no, they won't. The target custody and who has command and control, those decisions are allocated to the force, but the whole force should see what's going on, or at least the part that they are aware of. And so by making data more available, we're giving the innovation that can exist at lower levels, especially if they're disconnected, more options than if we just held everything centrally in some place.
It also gives you this ability to automate the delegation of authorities to say, yes, everybody can see the targets and everybody can see what the course of action or what the commander's intent is, but we're going to delegate authorities to particular people, and we can do that automatically in ways.
And have much more dynamic decision making.
Now, is this an area where AI can be applied to help commanders manage the complexity of that? Because you might have a lot of individual sub-commanders who could all take action on a particular objective, and you need some help in determining which one is the right one to delegate it to, and then what are the implications of those courses of actions in terms of my future options?
Yes, 100%. I think, especially generative AI, which has changed the game. I think when we think about things like operational planning and decision making, we've kind of been limited by like Monte Carlo models for a long time, which are a little bit, still very robust, but a little bit more static. And generative AI has really opened up the opportunity for us to think differently about how we even just come up with courses of action. There are things that a generative AI model or set of models may come up with that humans may not have thought of, and that's really helpful for us. And so we're starting to experiment. I think DIU just put out a commercial solutions offering a couple months ago around operational planning and AI. We have our AI rapid capability cell that's looking at different opportunities to pilot with new capabilities. And I know out in industry, they've started building partnerships and are connected with the operational forces to really take a look at where we go here.
And so, now that talks about command and control, but obviously there's another big element of this is how do I work with the operator to get this to the force in a meaningful way, which gets to the work that you guys have done with GIDE, and also Open DAGIR, because you have to have an environment in which you can have this work be conducted. How important is it that you've established essentially kind of a pipeline and an infrastructure so that other folks can fall in on it and use it? And is that in a lot of ways what you see happening where the services or individual organizations within DoD are using the infrastructure and process you've provided to kind of pilot their own command and control tools and instantiations?
Yeah, a couple things. We don't want to force any solution on the services. We think that that the uniqueness of their missions are different, and they exist for a reason. Their environments are very different. But when it comes to the joint force and how we make sure that we're interoperable together, we absolutely see opportunity to leverage the existing vehicles that we have. We were very intentional through Open DAGIR to make sure that the data is not locked in, that this is government-owned data, and that you can bring your own applications. And so if you want access to the data, that is one of the biggest things we as CDAO can give to the department is freeing up the data and being able to bring your own tool, but we're going to set the parameters for data sharing and responsibility and security and those types of things. And then how they carry that to the tactical edge is mission specific and dependent on what they want to do. So we've absolutely, through our enterprise contracts, set up room for others to leverage those. And then what was there was one other piece.
But, so are these organizations able to just basically fall in on your pipeline of like your development pipeline because they don't have their own?
Yes, thanks for the reminder. So the development pipeline is key, right? Because the applications that we have today are suited to our current set of conflicts and crises. The pipeline of being able to identify a gap very quickly, prototype a software solution with government data very quickly, put it in front of users, whether it's in a guide or whether it's in the real world or whether it's in a other kind of experiment, but put it quickly in front of users, get that feedback, make some tweaks, and have that continuous DevSecOps pipeline to then field it in an operationally relevant way allows us to be so much more responsive to anything that may come in the future. And we have just learned time and time again, really from the Advana side, where we started with the audit crisis and then COVID happened and then Ukraine happened. The Afghan year was in between. I mean, just everything was slightly different. Even in the hurricane relief response that we did recently, DoD was able to connect some of our core capabilities down with local and state types of capabilities to support domestic response. And so it just gives us this ability to flex and to the solution whenever, or to the crisis when it comes.
So when you talk about a pipeline and working with the user community, essentially, if you were looking at this in a commercial setting, you would know what you'd know your user community because that's your client or you're their client. Here, what is the user community that you're tapping into? Because is it ad hoc or is it project specific, or do you kind of have a set of likely suspects that you tend to work with? Or
I mean, there's only like 3 million people in the department, and we are in like 160 countries in the seabed to the outer space, so not a ton of users. No, I mean,
So how do you down select to? Yeah,
that's exactly right. So again, the mission threads really drive it. We in GIDE have a focus on global integration. So how do we coordinate across the globe? How do you go from that operational down to tactical level? And then how do you work with allies and partners? Those are our 3 focus areas on the GIDE side. In the enterprise side, we have a bunch of other pieces associated with how we do performance management in the department, how we do logistics, and actually logistics is great because it crosses both. And we sometimes have a tendency to put like the business side over here and the warfighting side over there, and you say, well, what about logistics? And so that really gives us a good view of interoperability. And so for the department, most of the department is functionally organized. I mean, this is the characteristic of a bureaucracy. It is good that the guy who checks the watertightness of a submarine, that is his job, and he's not writing the national defense strategy. So the functional specialization helps us in some degree. We leverage that functional specialization, whether it's personnel or readiness or acquisition and sustainment, or you pick that area. Those communities drive the way they want to manage data. And we do that both on the business side and the operational side. The integration piece is where we try to come in and say, okay, now we want to understand how we make decisions about logistics feasibility on like operational courses of action, and how do we bring the J4 and the J3 together? That's where we and CDAO step in and say, okay, let's look at how those data pieces come together, how the applications and the visualizations, and then back to the workflow. Give you some reps and sets as a to add the human element to it and make sure it works.
Right. So one example I think that at least that we've been working on is test and evaluation. And so TRMC and the DOT&E have been making a lot of efforts to try to bring forward test and evaluation through digitization. So if we've got more digital models and digitally designed equipment, and we've done more virtual assessments of them, why can't we virtualize or digitize more of the test and evaluation pathway? They build up huge amounts of data. They obviously could benefit from a lot of the tools and pipelines that you have. Have you worked with like the test and evaluation community to try to bring some of these same processes and tools to bear?
Yeah, in AI in particular, particularly through Replicator, we are working with them on how do we give operators the confidence that the models that are being developed are going to produce the results they expect or need, and how do we communicate that to them in both the development process and then also in the fielding, because those models then get real world input and they change. And so we worked really closely with them, have a couple agreements to work together and pair our teams up together. I think the modeling and simulation space and how we look at digitization of test and evaluation is absolutely another key, and where we use AI and how we manage the data associated with that is another great area.
Yeah, and so now also everybody has like their own data sets. I mean, the T&E community has their own data pile. And the question is, does that data pile ever make its way into other people's data, or can you make it available? Is that something that you're trying to do with Advana?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the test and evaluation data itself comes in Advana. We're in the process now of working through with kind of the refresh of Advana next year, how we make Advana data available to everyone else. I think that's, Advana is a relational database. We have other databases that are more object-oriented or more tactically oriented. And I think to the extent that the test evaluation community, takes an open DAGIR approach, that's easy for us to be able to share data and models together.
Right. So one of the things I want to make sure that we touch on is how do you go about working with industry, and how do you bring industry players into this? Rada talked about trying to basically decouple the development of the environment from the applications that might be on that environment. So is that something where you look at different providers to help you build the environment and then build the infrastructure, if you will, that you talked about, and then have different companies be competing to provide applications, and then do you then recompete the awarding of the infrastructure contract every once in a while? Is that kind of multi-layered approach?
That's exactly right. The infrastructure, we want to be stable. Our data is our data, and we need to manage it in a responsible way and understand its integrity and its pedigree and its security and reliability and that type of stuff. And that's a relatively stable capability. We do want to compete that because we want the latest and greatest in terms of how we manage our data. We've essentially kind of looked at those types of contracts based off of the way the data is managed and the type of data. So relational versus object versus tactically, time latent kind of stuff versus autonomy versus AI. But then on top of that, any company with with the ability to develop software for a user can come in, and the idea is that they can reach into any of the stacks. And so one of the core capabilities we're developing is a data marketplace, which will allow industry to come in and say, okay, I've got a user and they have a problem. Where do I find the data? And what form is it in? And how do I pull it from one stack to another? How do I cross clouds? How do I access different AI models and combine them in the best way for a user? This allows us to leverage the benefits of industry and the expertise that exists in different areas. So if you are a data infrastructure provider, you're going to have different expertise than a model developer, different expertise than the application provider that kind of pulls different pieces together. And through these different types of contracts, making sure that we can support the DoD user as best as possible.
And that should give you an opportunity to get best of breed capabilities, because you're the highly competitive environment for the apps, and then a somewhat competitive environment for the infrastructure. Is this idea of essentially federating or disaggregating the software stack procurement, is that an effort to try to promote innovation as well as address some of the need for lowering costs, I suppose?
Yes. We know that there are so many problems we can solve with software and data and AI, and yet we have, up until really this year, bought vertically integrated capabilities. And those vertically integrated capabilities leverage the expertise of that group of providers, but there's a limit. And so to really unlock the ability for the Department of Defense to access one of America's most strategic assets, its industry capacity, especially in the software and AI space, we had to unlock our data. And the ability to now, through Open DAGIR, disconnect the applications from the data. This is the technical principle is known. I think in DoD, though, we don't build our own stuff, we buy it. And we had to figure out the business model and the contracts model to then reflect the technical best practices. And now that we've done that, we're excited to see what other industry providers can bring in and what they can do with our data, because now it's open.
Right. So getting to kind of where the software has been more impactful in warfighting. We've tended to buy military systems, as you said, as an integrated package. So you buy the hardware and there's some software that comes with it, usually created by the company that made the hardware, maybe not as good as it could be. And so there's definitely a move to try to decouple that and try to make more of the hardware commoditized and make more of the software where the secret sauce is in terms of getting military capability. How have you guys been working in that space? So because we focused mostly up to this point on software kind of applications, which are mostly software, as opposed to a hardware software system like a missile or an aircraft or a tank or a ship.
There's a lot of really neat innovation happening in the services. I'm probably most familiar with the Navy, where they were able to, decouple the vertically integrated Aegis system and have a hardware like sidecar on a ship, and then be able to rapidly deploy applications. Navy has an amazing data science at sea program where they can put new models out into the fleet very quickly. And I think that kind of approach where we can start to specialize our approach to data and analytics based off of the mission, whether it's at a tactical stage in a service, or whether you look at a combatant command. Through the Open DAGIR process, we run challenges and we couple them with GIDE. And so our first challenge was on logistics, where we said we want a third-party company to come in with a logistics solution. And we put out a challenge, got a couple, I think we're going through the down select now, to prove that we can take another application and put it inside of a different company stack. And then we'll do a couple of more challenges next year, and then we're partnered with DIU on the AI side to introduce AI into that model.
Which gives you an opportunity now to increase competition and innovation, because now we can have different software companies competing to be the software provider for a piece of hardware that otherwise would have had its own dedicated, integrated software stack. And then when you get to the actual contracting to buy software, one of the challenges in the past has been the DoD has either bought software integrated with hardware and it's just sort of baked into the price. Or you pay a time and materials contract because somebody's basically going to go write software on the DoD's time. But if you're going to buy software as a product, essentially, do you need a different approach to buying software?
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about it in a couple of different ways. One is, there are core licenses for software that allows you to access the suite of tools and products that a company has, maybe existing applications that they bring. And then there's engineering time to develop new things. And we want core licenses for users to use the existing things, but then we also want to buy engineering time to develop new things. And we may not know exactly what those new things are, but we have this list of requirements over here. And the Joint Staff actually did a fantastic job writing a CJAD-C2 initial capabilities document, or ICD, which traditionally our requirements are so narrowly scoped, and they really limit what we will focus on and what we can deliver. They did it from a mission perspective, and they said in order for us to get CJAD-C2, we need kind of 4 key capability areas. No problem. And that has set the foundation now for a requirements linkage back to a JROC approved document, but the ability to produce capability need statements and much more rapid requirements needs from users across the force, that we can say, okay, we've projected out that we're going to buy engineering time, and we know the backlog is going to be much longer than anything we fund, right? So how do we now, as a joint community or as a service, prioritize what that looks like, and then have that agility in the year of execution to say, like, this is our priority, this is what we're going to go after first. The engineers are ready to go. We were able to surge some engineers into the Indo-Pacific just a couple weeks ago in a response to an emerging requirement, and also to a couple other combatant commands. It's just amazing just to see customers in the department come back and say, that was like, I asked you for it and you gave it to me, and it was weeks or months as opposed to years and years or never hearing from you again, and that just makes us feel really good.
That's great.
Yeah.
So let me turn it over to, see if we have questions from the audience. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and David will come around with the microphone right here. And so let us know your name and affiliation, and then ask your question. Sure.
Yeah, Chip Welter from Marlin Spike Partners, small VC here in the local area. Love what you're saying. Love Open DAGIR. Love GIDE. It really is well. For some of the smaller companies that we deal with all the time, I'm seeing a little bit of a hurdle that we're not talking about. So if you could explain it so that we could understand and advise our companies a little bit better, would be the ATO process, and not only the ATO process, but Open DAGIR. You're not exposing your data to everybody, because then our adversaries could get into it. So there has to be some hoops to get into. There has to be some security things that are built into that in order to be able to play in Open DAGIR. So if there's a way that you could just explain that very quickly, and happy to follow up afterwards, but we want to guide our companies to be able to help you get the best of breed.
Yeah, I think three things. One is in CDAO, we run a TradeWinds marketplace, which is designed specifically for non-traditional companies, 5-minute video. You do a 5-minute pitch. We host a panel every month that reviews the videos, takes a look at whether the solution could meet a DoD need. Is it mature enough? Is it ready to go? If the panel moves the capability into the TradeWinds marketplace, that's competition. That's anybody in DoD can now award a contract out of the TradeWinds marketplace for that capability. So we have like 4 things in CDAO that we're trying to do for industry. One is access to our contracts, that's through TradeWinds. The other is access to our data, that's Open DAGIR. Other is access to our networks, that's the ATO. The ATO process is of course challenging for non-traditionals. We're thinking through some creative methods with CIO, whether that's partnering with some of the larger companies that know how to do this to create some sort of onboarding ramp that makes it a little easier, so it's not all in the back of the traditional company. I think we need a couple more months to kind of finalize some of those pieces. I want everyone in TradeWinds to have like a badge for their ATO. So like once you come in, like how do we now pair you up with a user in a ATO process that you get your unclass or secret badge. And then the other piece you asked about was access to the data. So we also have a capability in CDAO where we can put data into an environment that is not a government backbone. It's a capability that came out of Project Maven. It's really innovative. It allows us to do a lot of the AI development with non-traditional partners. Start there, demonstrate what's in the realm of the possible. If it looks like it's promising, that gives us and the company a little bit more confidence to invest in the ATO pieces to get into government networks. And so we're trying to go after some of the barriers in a couple different ways. But we hear that so often, and that is on the agenda for 2025.
Oh, and so while David's doing that, how about access to SCIFs and clearances for companies that are trying to get into the market, but obviously there's a chicken and egg problem.
We've heard it a lot from some of the model providers, especially sponsors for clearances, and that is absolutely something that we can do in the government. The access to SCIFs piece, we can also sponsor that, and we can take a look at how that looks, especially when there's a mission need for it. Those can come with the performance contract.
Hi, Austin Toole, affiliation Johns Hopkins SAIS. I believe your office led a years-long task force to study Gen AI capabilities in defense, and then you all recently announced $35 million investment into 4 pilot projects in terms of frontier AI applications. Could you provide additional details on those pilot cases that are coming up, including which, if any, of the leading frontier AI companies like Google DeepMind or Anthropic or OpenAI that you'll be working with, and what's your experience been like working with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did Task Force Lima. It was about an 18-month effort, I think. They just wrapped up their report this summer, and we've released the executive summary a couple weeks ago when we announced the stand-up of the AI Rapid Capability Cell. Believe it or not, it's hard to believe now, but when we started, when Gen AI first came out, there was a big debate inside of CDAO in terms of whether or not it was the right thing for DoD, because remember at the time, like there was some concern around hallucinations. We weren't really sure if its predictions could be reliable, and especially in a warfighting environment. So instead of debating, we experiment. That's what we do. We want to prove it out with data. Go figure. So we did the task force, and through there worked across DoD to capture some of the most relevant use cases that everyone in DoD was interested in. And I think we got over 800 of them. I mean, there was a huge number, and we were able to look, bin them into different areas. Rada mentioned before 14 areas. So we took those many use cases, and we boiled them down to 14 areas. We'll pick 2 warfighting areas and 2 enterprise management areas. One of them will be audit focused. The others we're not going to talk about publicly. But the idea is that through the AI Rapid Capability Cell, we have funding inside of CDAO to do AI development, and we call it AIML scaffolding, or like the supporting pieces to help others develop AI. we know that compute is a huge barrier to actually leveraging, especially frontier models, but also current Gen AI. So we've swung a bunch of our existing funding in 24 and 25 to just get started. We know we're not going to hit the massive compute numbers, but we've also been talking both internally and externally to our sponsors and to the department to encourage the investment in compute necessary. And we'll see. Obviously, we'll see where the budget process goes here in the future. But through the pilots, we will be able to use different providers. We're hoping to use all the model providers. We're hoping to partner with the cloud providers, some of the other application providers, and just get a sense of, what are our requirements for compute? What's the right model in terms of, maybe you want to use a RAG on Nipper, but maybe you have to port it up to the high side. High side compute is much more expensive. So we have a lot to experiment with and learn the right business models and operational models. So we're hoping to start off with a diverse set of providers, and we will not be the only ones I know in this space. And so we're also connected with the services and their efforts and talking to the combatant commands around what they need and how we can all learn about this together. And then CDAO kind of pull that together and go back to our sponsors and back to the leadership of the department and say, this is where we think we need some help.
Right. So are you concerned about duplication of effort or duplication of investment where you have services independently buying compute to be able to go pursue an initiative they want to do with Gen AI?
Compute is really expensive. And so I'm not so worried about duplicate investment on the compute side. Hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, for advanced GPUs each year in the Gov Cloud, right? And so that, this exists in the commercial sector, but to bring it into Gov Cloud. So I think we've got a good partnership effort there, not just internal to the department, but also with the intelligence community, who is, both our key partner and has a similar need. We are collecting use cases from across the department for how to use some of these more advanced models, and through there, I think we're going to have a good framework to understand, where the services might focus compared to where we will focus, and then how we partner together, because it's not, it's not a separate effort. We want it to come together.
And it seems like what you're implying too is that you're going to have different models, different versions of models, some of which are lighter and some of which are more compute heavy, and depending on whether you're out at the edge or you're not. So I mean, I'm thinking like a command and control tool that a operator or unit might have out in the Western Pacific would probably need to be a lot lighter than what you might be able to take advantage of if you're at Indo-PACOM headquarters or if you're at Fort Meade.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we run models forward in disconnected environments, and what does that look like? Yes, all the different aspects of how we might structure it. There are lots of ideas around the department of how to structure things. There are, without a doubt, experiments and smaller projects. I think now is the time for us to pull this together and put it into operations.
And also, it seems like there's a plethora of use cases that we probably haven't really, I mean, you mentioned that thinking about using Gen AI for COA development, which I don't know, I mean, it's not an intuitive use case. You think Gen AI, it's going to be large language models, it's going to be predictive work, some kind of text that as opposed to a series of actions that are coordinated in space and time with military forces. But it seems like you should be able to bring that analytic model to bear, but you need the training set, I guess, to present to it.
Yeah, one of the things we did for Replicator several different systems in Replicator, but of different types, and each traditional department process, right? And no shade being thrown on it, but each system had its own way of developing autonomy and different algorithms that it needed for operations. And when we looked across, and we said, well, if you're all in the air and you're all looking at how to navigate or conduct autonomous operations from the air, why are you each independently developing your own data set? And so from CDAO, we were able to do what we call like a data sprint, collect all the data available and put it in one place and say, okay, now we can invite model developers to leverage all that data. We can get some good models, tweak them, and refine them for the individual platforms if necessary. But we get the economies of scale, and we get the speed, and we get the pipeline, the repeatable pipeline, so that companies, especially the smaller ones, can come in and there's an established process. It's not different based off of each system. So we're trying to find unique opportunities there, and I think in the Gen AI space it'll be similar.
Yeah, because now you have a data set that you can use to train a model for a particular application, which is, I think, not necessarily what people gravitate to when they think, but they're just their personal, kind of commercial experience with generative AI.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Although we
Great.
do have exceptional we call it Nipper
Right.
GPT, which gives us, I think I use it, I'm one of their top users, but great capability run out of AFRL by Alexis Bonnell, and she's really trailblazing just the general purpose use of that capability, and we're excited to see where that goes next too.
Yeah, I mean, which I think the idea of these rapid capability cells is a great idea to start fleshing out what the use cases are and expose people to it that who otherwise might be curmudgeonly and say, I don't need this. I've been doing co-analysis for decades. I don't need to have a Gen AI tool to give me co 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, and we do have to prove it out. I think that's the key. I remember in the early stages of GIDE, we had digitized some of the option development in one of the pieces of the workflow, and the operators were like, we're just going to go to the whiteboard again, and then we'll input in what we said. And they were like, no, look, this is how you use the tool. And once they realized it, they were like, oh, yeah, we don't need that whiteboard anymore. Like, this is fantastic. But they needed to see that the tool could generate enough confidence in the same results as their manual process. And I think with Gen AI, we're going to have to understand the reliability of the recommendations and make sure we've got the right things.
Well, so to pull the string on that a little bit, because we did some wargaming along this line. We did the Mosaic Warfare wargaming series. And one of the lessons of that was the commanders were getting exposed to courses of action they would not have come up with on their own that are maybe not ideal, right? They were not the 100% optimized COA, but it was an unexpected COA that the red side didn't predict, right? So you came up with options that the commander, in some cases, chose because they said, well, this isn't going to be as effective as my kind of normal approach, but the other side will not really expect it. So I'll be able to maybe get the advantage of surprise over them, which worked.
Yeah.
So I think opening up the option space is, I guess, what you're talking about here with using Gen AI.
I was thinking back to the Navy and the Inner War Years, where the War College had quite some time to think through branches and sequels and which plan worked and which plan didn't, and but that took them years of experimenting and doing stuff, and I think we speed that process up a lot now with some creativity and AI solutions.
Right. So any more questions from the group? Oh, David is saying no more questions from the group. Actually, I can take one more question. One more quick question in the back there, because you didn't get asked before.
FT Smirnakis, co-founder of a startup called Kibu. Just curious, how are you thinking about AI agents, which are now sort of the discussion du jour, how that may interact with kill chain going forward, and how you put the human in the loop, authorize the right human? Obviously, one of the concerns in the industry now is authorization and making sure that actually, the AI isn't spoofing identity, spoofing authorization. So how do we tackle that when you're dealing with, as you mentioned, all of these different force structures and commands that have different platforms in the field, and then different systems back at the Pentagon?
Yeah, absolutely. So in warfighting and in actually all decision making, there's always a human who's responsible for the decision. And when we do experimentation or delivery of capability, the workflow, and back to your question about test and evaluation, we make sure that we understand the controls on the processes that exist, and there are good controls in our warfighting processes that ensure responsibility and safety and reliability of what's going to happen. So I also think the whole workflow is not going to be AI enabled, and there are going to be places absolutely where humans are going to be at every step. They're going to be experts in what that looks like. There will be places where the AI is actually going to make recommendations, and we're going to be able to collapse timelines, and we're going to be able to collapse specialties in some cases, and not necessarily. We're always going to need the experts for the expert thing. There's the fog of war is just a part of the nature of war, and that's not going to change. And so I think we have a very deliberate design process for how we introduce these capabilities, and I think that's a core element going forward. That it's not just about the tech, but it's about how humans and machines team together to get to the best optimal outcome.
Well, I think we'll leave it there because time's up, but also great discussion.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Margie Palmieri, for being with us today. So Margie is the Principal Deputy Director at the Chief Digital and AI Office. And then thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to talking in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Great to
thanks.
see you.
You too.
And so with that, I'm going to bring up our panel, talk a little bit about what the industry folks have been doing in this space. So we have Rob Morrissey here who works at defense programs at Palantir. And we also have Zach Kramer from Anduril, where he is the general manager for Mission Command. So gentlemen, you want to grab a seat there? So we just heard from Margie about some of the initiatives that CDAO is doing, and your companies have been sort of key to a lot of the recent efforts that CDAO has been pursuing in terms of delivering software through GIDE with Advana mission analytics and also with Open DAGIR. So how have you been supporting those efforts? And then we'll talk a little bit about how you've been partnering together. So Rob, how has Palantir been interacting with CDAO in these projects?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks again for having us. So we've been partnering with CDAO for a number of years, and some of our capabilities were brought into CDAO from, like Dr. Plum was saying, some of the organizations that predated it. And so I think there's a couple of different ways that we've been a part of the GIDE series of experimentation. So that's both as some of that underlying infrastructure that's allowing CDAO to bring in newer capabilities, smaller companies through Open DAGIR, which we're super excited about, and integrate those into those 90-day sprints. And so there's a bunch of interesting examples, including places where the department has a process for global force management. There hasn't always been the same kind of structure for things like allocating critical munitions by combatant command, and so there's been a lot of experimentation to look at how do we bring data and workflows to both evolve the tools, but then also some of the doctrine and TTPs around those questions. So GIDE and CJAD C2 kind of looking at those problems, and then on the Advana side, we've a number of pilots now underway to integrate some of our tools, Foundry and AIP, into the Advana platform. We're really excited about. I think the approach Advana's taken with an ecosystem is exactly the right approach, moving towards 1.2, and so we're really excited. At the moment, sort of the demand for some of those pilots is outstripping what we're able to support, but they're looking at everything from logistics to actually getting after the audit and things like financial management.
So thanks, Rob. So Zach, how has Anduril been working with CDAO in these initiatives?
So thank you very much for having me today. On the Anduril side of things, one of the things that we've been really looking at is how do you get after the edge problem? And so how do you get after the ability to access data that previously is inaccessible and be able to bring that data back in new and interesting ways, and then provide that ability to take action at the edge? So if we look at where Anduril came from, growing up building autonomous systems that operate out in disparate environments, and then taking those learnings and really partnering with the CDAO on how do we bring that back to be able to say, how am I collecting data? How do I look at different things? And so we've been working through the experimentation processes that Dr. Plum outlined on how do we connect to legacy systems? How do we then bring those back into a centralized data mesh? And then how do we have that data mesh which is able to come back to and provide those data repositories through the Open DAGIR approach that says now we can do interesting and new things on that. We can then take those learnings across that data, bring it back to the edge. And so whether that's publishing data from those, subscribing to that data to bring it to the edge, or tasking assets, creating a globally distributed data mesh unlocks a wide range of possibilities, and then has even been something deep with Palantir on a partnership perspective of how are we feeding those experiences that allow new and different capabilities. And so we've done a bunch of work both with CDAO on how we think about the Maven Smart Systems approach and the edge data mesh and how those two things can marry together to say, I now have unlocked this new wealth of data that's at these sources. I can bring it back in ways that are new and interesting, and now surface that and enable that decision making and those capabilities.
So that's a really interesting point. So Rob, we've talked about Maven Smart System before, which is a command and control, mission planning, mission management software package that's evolved out of the Maven, Project Maven AI-enabled target recognition tool that was developed, I guess 10 years ago now. Yeah. Maven Smart System, it sounds like what you're saying is acting as a kind of a higher echelon tool that commanders could use to be able to kind of oversee the fight, build plans, assess those plans. And then with what Anduril is doing in terms of edge processing, you're able to take advantage of the data that's becoming available from systems that are actually deployed. Is that kind of how we're looking at marrying these up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think there's a couple of areas where we're looking at applying that. One is as the department starts to operationalize robotic and autonomous systems, how do you take some of the decision aids that might exist at an operations center at a higher echelon and maybe in smart system, and then integrate that very tightly with what Lattice enables from a tactical C2 and autonomy perspective. I think the other area is there's some decision aids that are run in an enterprise way in the cloud within even smart system, but may need to be available in expeditionary environments. And so Anduril and what they're doing with the tactical edge data mesh has a lot of ability to provide that data layer. How do we just run some of the Maven Smart System components on top of that and leverage what Anduril is already doing at the edge to accelerate that?
Yeah, and I think that when you go down to the edge, you require a different design paradigm than what's happening when you're at a higher echelon where you have centralized capabilities. And so as we look at what we've done kind of from the Anduril's approach to the problem has been, okay, how do you design for the edge first? Like, I don't assume that I have data connectivity. I don't assume that I can get back to my data sources if I need to, but I need to be able to provide enough of an operating picture to make decisions and take actions. But then as we're able to fuse that data together, bring it up to the right places, then we can make broader decisions in those. And so that's been where there's been a really powerful partnership between Palantir and Anduril on this front, which is we can bring those best of those capabilities that are coming from the upper echelons, bring this down, and then enable learnings from there to operate at the edge, as you were saying, from an overlap perspective, and also for us to gain access to data and capabilities. As Dr. Plum was saying, with like open DAGIR and those capabilities to say, how do we make the edge smarter?
And it would enable this idea that Admiral Paparo's talked about of adaptable command and control, right? So he wants the ability for field commanders to take charge of what's going on in their AOR when they no longer have communication with higher headquarters. So you got to have that ability to have edge data benefit from the command and control tools and the delegation of authorities that might be coming from the higher echelon. And today or in the past, we have not had that because Indo-PACOM or PAC-Fleet had to manage that operation centrally. And now you need the ability to have the fight continue and have commanders be enabled by those command and control tools to be able to fight effectively even when they no longer have comms. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen, one of these scenarios that's kind of interesting is if you think about kind of electronic warfare and where you're at with being able to manage signatures and things like that. And so if you're talking about that scenario, there's a broad kind of whole of theater approach that you're saying around what do I need to do to mask certain assets? How might I think about what I'm approaching with distractions or things like that? And you can then disseminate that to the various commanders, maybe at the strike group level, or maybe Marines operating on an island or something like that. But then the electronic warfare picture is going to change constantly and dynamically. So how are you then saying, okay, I can process the signals that I have here and make smart decisions? Okay, great. And I can adapt the battle plan to the reality of what's happening while still honoring the intent of the coordination, the big picture. And so that ability to say, I can look at this from the top level, set the direction, and then still be bringing data together, not relying on a centralized approach is one of the things that we've certainly seen. And that's been part of the partnership.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add just on the kind of EWP specifically is I think there's a lot of work that we're doing with Anduril in this space just around how do you start to build up the data model and the data picture of how both newer unmanned systems, but also some of our existing fielded systems, all of the different components on them in terms of their requirements, in terms of spectrum, needing to be available to operate effectively. We don't necessarily have a great common site picture of that across all the systems that are fielded in DoD. So how do you do that planning, build that data model in advance, enable that planning so that and get that to the right places in advance of the fight, so that you can enable decision making when needed at the edge.
And just one quick add. So as we look at the systems that we've been building, so Anduril certainly has approached it from learnings of the capabilities we built, but we've built an open system to integrate with anything because we both recognize that there's not a singular system or platform. And so by focusing on these integrations so that we can bring in both legacy platforms, new platforms that come online, and platforms that we produce, I can now unify that data in new and interesting ways because we have a common data mesh, we have common observability systems, and we have common ways of doing the operating picture. And so it creates this open ecosystem, which again is part of the push that CDAO has had, that it isn't that we are just saying we can support one system or we've built one vertical stack for one type of sensor or something like that.
Right. And I think also what one of the things that comes out of this is the ability to take the the kinds of analytic tools that you would have at the headquarters normally and push that capability out to the edge so that individual commanders will have that chance to kind of, when things need to change, right? If I want to continue meeting commander's intent, but conditions have changed here and I don't have the ability to communicate back with my higher headquarters, can I build a new course of action locally that is still consistent with what was directed from the higher echelon?
Yeah, and how do you have enough data in those areas and enough capability? Because again, I spent the last couple of decades working at Microsoft building clouds, and so if you try and say like, okay, how do I take all the capabilities that I could have at a cloud scale and put it on the back of an expeditionary unit with a Marine, like that's just never going to work, right? So you have to be very intentional about what are you bringing. Same thing with the data. It's if I can bring all the data back to central headquarters, there's one set of things that I can do when I have the full picture, but I need to have those tools be adaptable to when I only have the pieces of data that are available. And so that's where from a mesh and like us partnering on the SDKs and other things that Palantir produces is saying, I can build these capabilities that have enough function to make them more effective and that they adapt to what I have available.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, the only thing I would add, just one other complexity to layer on top of that. Obviously, there's the cloud to edge piece. Then there's also this notion of data exists at a number of different security levels, right? And so there's also this piece of like how do we fuse data that is being observed, in theater with what national capabilities or the IC is seeing, and where do you do that, and how do you allow data? How do you handle data in a way that allows it to move up and down where needed across those?
And we've talked about this in the past. I mean, to some degree, you've worked to automate that process. So you take the highly classified data that come from a national technical means, and then I think kind of dumb it down or reduce its precision, if you will, or accuracy, to allow it to be merged with data from another source, and then the whole data set that now fused is coming in a different classification. Is that how you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say. But yeah, that's at a high level, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is we've looked at some of these data models, whether it's the mesh or some of the work that that Palantir has done. As you look at getting towards a deeper understanding of what the data is and what the structures are, and you're not just handling data coming from disparate systems by that normalization of it, you can now be smarter about what you push down, right? Because you're saying, I have a common understanding of what an entity or a Blue Force, Red Force, and those tracks are, and I can standardize across all these systems, then what I'm pushing down only has to be approved once because I have a strong understanding of what that is, and I can disassociate from means or other things that might have preserved it at a higher level. And so we've really been working, like if you're talking about like at that intelligence level, making those determinations, being able to then push them down so that you can make an operational decision at the secret level and then disseminate across the force, potentially even down to unclassified settings.
Right.
And I think this is a really interesting area to apply language models and AI to as well. We've got foreign disclosure officers who sit at combatant command headquarters who spend their whole day looking at slides and until their eyes bleed, trying to apply security classification guides and as real world situations unfold, evolving guidance. And so I think we've seen a lot of promise, and we are partnering with a couple of organizations on pilots to look at how do you actually have a human in the loop, a human making the decision, but augment them and provide machine recommendations for how you can properly disseminate information, whether that's to partners or the public.
Yeah, and so to step back to one thing you brought up earlier, so electromagnetic battle management, which the DoD has struggled with for decades and is now rethinking its approach again. It seems like this would be an area that would be ripe for the kind of work that you guys are doing. You have a bunch of tactical edge sensors that are able to detect the environment. You have some models for what you expect to see in the environment that are at a higher level, and that you can then merge those from the tactical level sensors with the models of what you think the environment should be, and give commanders a sense of what the environment looks like on any moment to moment, and then attempt to deconflict and marry that up with the COA analysis. Say, am I building a COA that is going to create conflicts in the spectrum, or am I able to avoid those with a different COA? Is that stuff that you are working on in the course of this, or is that kind of a edge case that you're not really exploring?
No, that's absolutely something we're exploring and both exploring together as we look at it, because that has all the ingredients of a robust problem to be solved that is not going to be solved by throwing humans at staring at things, right? And so by being able to bring the data together in a reliable way, how do you create the pools of data that are needed to drive those insights and understandings? How do you use that to, like we were talking about, express commander's intent, but then be able to provide autonomy in those areas to be able to operate and make the real-time decisions? It really has all the ingredients of how we take the work that CDAO has done with bringing data together in an open way and allowing people to bring innovative solutions, because I don't think either of us are going to produce the model that solves all those problems. So you need people to be able to come in and bring small models, bring large models, bring other things in that are innovative and drive interest, bring, again, how do you think about co-analysis? There's so many variables when you're talking about that differentiation of how you might apply the various tools in your electronic warfare toolkit. And so, yeah, those are absolutely the types of problems. And then, many others as you look at, like, where does it get really complicated? And does data really unlock us to make the force 10x more effective or more?
Right. And there's a tactical, so getting now to like tactical operations, because you guys build a lot of hardware too.
Yeah.
The initiatives that you've got going on with CDAO, how are those improving the ability of those warfighting systems to be able to execute operations? Is it mostly a planning and orchestration benefit, or are we actually getting data out there that improves their lethality?
One of the things the department has struggled with is just that the systems don't know about each other, right? Like, they can't talk to each other, and they definitely can't talk to each other at the edge. Like, your best case is that you're able to bring the data back, bring it through some centralized thing, and fuse it there. And so with the edge data mesh integrating with the systems, it provides those sensors that are publishing data, or those weapon systems that are publishing data are being tasked to also be able to subscribe to data. And so now you're unlocking, like, new and interesting scenarios, which is if I have a Gator radar sitting at the edge and I've got some, like a pulsar thing from Anduril, how do those two things now know about each other and are able to be smarter and more autonomous because of the data they have around them? And so absolutely, we think this is something that makes the system smarter. It makes our system smarter, but it can make all of them smarter because, again, back to Open DAGIR and the way they're thinking about it, you can subscribe to it, and that may be a software company, but they could very well be a hardware company driving their sensor packages.
Right.
I think that's exactly right. The other example I would throw out there, which CDAO has been involved in and NGA has also played a key role in driving, is some of the experimentation. I had the opportunity to be involved in the Scarlet Dragon experimentation series. The Army's been driving similar kind of approach of 90-day sprints, looking at a set of capabilities and integrating those. What they introduced very early on was this notion of an engineering week prior to execution. So what they found is when everybody would show up, you would have programs or systems that didn't know about each other, and a lot of the value was sure the folks in uniform having hands on keyboard, going through the live fires, but was also just the community that they started to build and bringing these systems together and saying, hey, you're working on this, I'm working on this in this different way. How do you integrate these things? And so they actually allocated kind of a week prior to execution, which I think is what's driven a lot of the value in terms of getting engineers and soldiers sitting next to each other, establishing those integrations, and then testing it out, the next week. So it's I think it's been a great model for them and for the department and how they drive and kind of advance lethality.
So, that brings about a point I was going to talk about here with you guys is, I asked Margie about the contracting models that CDAO is using, or the department's using, to try to incentivize software companies to come in and bring their IP and innovation to the government, which is a different approach than on the kinetic side. You guys, Anduril can go develop a new weapon, offer to sell it to the government at a price, and you can bake into the price the profit that you want to try to make off of it. On the software side, the government doesn't tend to buy software that way. So they don't buy it as a product, they buy it as a service in a lot of ways. Is that changing? Margie talked about trying to fund engineering efforts to, which is kind of a form of R&D, I guess. Are you guys seeing from the industry side an effort on the part of the government to price software procurement in a way that incentivizes industry to go off and do its own innovation and come with something that's useful or better than what the government had before?
We are. I think at the end of the day, for me, it all comes down to measuring outputs or inputs. And I think there is a move, if you measure inputs, the incentive is going to potentially be to maximize the inputs independent of what's actually the outcomes being delivered. And I think there has been a real shift to looking at how do we use firm fixed price contracting structures, how do we actually look at what's working. And CDAO's, through the GIDE series, has brought various capabilities on, looked at what's working, and then kept that going to iterate in future iterations, and then removed what wasn't working. And so I think as CDAO does this, there's also sort of a growing understanding of how do you scope these things, and how do you, even when we're talking about incremental workflows or engineering efforts, how do you scope those in a way that can be kind of appropriately putting the risk with industry to deliver something that works, and leveraging IP and products in a way that preserves that incentive to keep R&D moving forward on the commercial side.
Oh, good.
Oh, I was going to say, for both of us, I think the other thing is that the DNA of kind of our company thinks of things as product, right? And so as we look at products, that means that when our conversations with CDAO and others, it is you're purchasing an outcome and a capability. You're not purchasing a number of humans typing on a keyboard.
Yeah.
And so by purchasing that outcome and that capability, it puts the onus on us to innovate and drive those things and understand the problems intimately and make sure that our capability meets that need. And so we've certainly seen that change, and that is one of the things that's driving force behind us, which is we're not starting from a sheet of requirements. We're starting from here's our product capabilities and how they meet the needs of your problem.
So it seems like on the government side, one of the challenges is scoping the request or scoping the demand signal in a way that allows for that differentiation of offerings from industry, right? If you scope it too large and you make it too much of an integrated product, then you're going to maybe eliminate the possibility of some player being able to come forward that has an innovative solution because they can't deliver the entire thing. They can only deliver a piece of it. Have you seen the government be is CDAO trying to do that, trying to break up the elephant into a smaller number of bites so that they can have different players come in and contribute, or is it still relatively large?
Well, I think they're focused on creating an ecosystem that then the software companies can operate in is a key thing. And so if you think about how does the government create incentives, you have to both think about the economics and the environment for success. Because this is a unique environment that is highly regulated and governed, you're not going to have software companies that can just organically break in. So you have to open the door for them and create the conditions for success, both from the economic perspective of how they can sell their products and do those things. They certainly have talked about innovative contracting, and we've seen the benefits of that. But also how we're creating and saying, okay, Anduril has plumbed an edge data mesh. Palantir has built an ontology that allows you to have access to data. We've made these things available through shared capabilities, and as we are open and available, we can then allow these smaller, innovative players to come in and do net new things and benefit the department. So yes, definitely, and experimentation, as we've said several times, has been key to allow people to prove what we're doing is real and allow the outcome to speak for itself versus saying you have to purchase something up front.
But it does seem that it requires you to have kind of a software prime in a way, but you have to have larger software companies that are able to provide that infrastructure, whether it's the data infrastructure or the analytic infrastructure, as opposed to
But that's true in the commercial environments also, where we see large cloud providers. I mean, not everybody can just stand up a cloud for fun. And so you having those in there that can set those conditions, but making sure you're holding them accountable to openness and transparency.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
So I'm going to open up to questions from the audience if there are any. So if you have a question, raise your hand, let me know. We have a couple minutes left for that. Chip, yeah. They'll bring the microphone around. Oh. What about
So the question, and it goes back a little bit to the past conversation about wargaming. So when I look at tools, I look at data. Is there a game here that can make sure that the data is learning from what the sensor's finding and then rethinking itself to update the sensor? So it goes around the gaming kind of the wargaming kind of piece on that. And maybe that's more in a Palantir lane, and Anduril's maybe more the recipient of that refined data or continually evolving data.
I guess I would say a big part of the announcement that our company's made a couple weeks ago is actually having this be a joint thing, and then also looking to bring other participants into this. But yeah, I think, and that's exactly the intent. You've got increasingly devices that are collecting data, understanding behaviors, and you need some way to bring that back to inform autonomy concepts, how these things are operationalized. So yeah, I mean, I think
Yes, just yes.
Yes, yeah, yep, and yeah, something we're working together.
100%.
Hi. Anduril's recent partnership with OpenAI how did you know that OpenAI was the right strategic partner for you, and did you have conversations with other frontier AI companies before you made that decision? And then for Palantir, for Rob, do you feel like there's a chance Palantir has too much influence in U.S. national security technology, or just the right influence given the change in administration and the relationships that will be in place? Thank you both.
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks. On the Anduril side, I mean, we certainly are looking at a wide range of AI solutions. OpenAI is obviously a leader in this space, and so having their expertise and partnership will enable us to build some innovative solutions. But we also, AI is a broad brush, and so there's lots of different opportunities for us to integrate and provide AI solutions. We do see AI as critical to the autonomy efforts that we have to drive as we go forward.
Yeah, I
Are
mean,
you guys big enough?
well, what I say, I mean, and Dr. Karp has said this as well. Palantir exists to serve the U.S. government, right? Everything we're doing in the department is at the direction and in service of the decision makers in uniform and on the civilian side. So I think we are looking to use our influence to help advance experimentation and how we're all able to participate as part of this ecosystem, bring in new companies, and really accelerate what's happening in terms of defense tech innovation. But so I think from that standpoint, yeah, I think we have sort of a good level of influence, and we're excited to continue contributing in the next administration.
Oh, there's a question over there.
Hi, I'm Teresa Marr, Inside Defense. I was just wondering, we were talking about kind of deciding, you're not going to be able to bring all the data down to the tactical level. I just wanted to see if the mesh or any of your data networks will, who makes that decision? Does the combatant commander get to make that decision? Is it CDA's decision? Is it the network's decision, basically? And then a second question, you also talked about the accountability of cloud providers, the larger software systems, to kind of keep this open, accessible ecosystem. How have you seen, or how have you seen kind of either Anduril be able to do that, or CDAO be able to put those controls in place? Thanks.
Great. So from the edge data mesh perspective, there's several layers of control that are there. So the first one is that as we think about each of the locations where you have data, there's an intent that they will have decision-making authority over what they do as to which data they wish to pull down. Obviously governed by security and other layers of mechanisms, like if it's data that they don't have access to, then of course they won't be allowed to bring that down. The second thing is that the system tunes itself as it looks at what network bandwidth and other things are available. So as you end up, if you have a very robust connection, then obviously lots of data can flow, but using prioritization, again, based on the workflows and the other things that are happening down at the edge, there's a determination made of what data comes down. So there might be data that is providing situational awareness and things like that is helpful, but then targeting and tasking data gets priority over that because it needs to come down and run. And then the third thing that we have is geofencing of the data. So you're not bringing all the data, but what is the data that's relevant to the location where you're operating so that it can tune based on those things. So there's a lot of different thought that goes into, again, how you design those systems and do that. CDAO is definitely not defining what that has to be for people. It's, again, about creating a platform and a capability. And so that has been good. On the openness, I think CDAO is definitely, with OpenDAGIR and other things, pushing to make sure that we have that. And that certainly is something that Anduril has been from the start. We just released our SDK that has all the capabilities, and none of the data is locked up. It's all about how you can create access, whether you're at the edge or at a central repository, and whether that may go into other systems. And again, exemplified by the Palantir partnership of we can feed that data into their systems, we can take data from their systems, and so that bidirectional nature is there. So I think the government reinforcing that through contracting and requirements obviously is key. And then I think there's just a sea change in the ecosystem, recognizing that it's better together, and saying that data, and the cloud providers have done this too, where you've seen the dropping of egress fees and other things like that. There's an acknowledgement that there's going to be a multi-party ecosystem that needs to figure out how to coexist, and that you can probably do a lot more than trying to stamp something out there.
Nothing to add.
Great. I think that captures the main points that we wanted to address today. So, although I guess one thing I wanted to add at the very end here is that you've both been working, both companies have been working together here on a couple of initiatives recently. Do you see, are there new opportunities going forward where you anticipate that Anduril and Palantir are going to continue to work together?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sorry. Beyond just the CDAO, or also you're working together on the Army Titan system?
Exactly. I was going to say, I think the next, obviously with the CDAO, and then I think there's a number of opportunities across the services. So the work we're doing together on Titan, advancing some of Army's concepts for next-gen C2, and then also what we're looking to do with the Navy. I think the Navy's sort of seeing what CDAO is doing and establishing with some of their capabilities, and looking to then take that to support things like CNO's effort to fight from the mock, and how do we do that? And that's something we're going to be tightly linked with Anduril on across those efforts.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Rob Morrissey. Thank you very much for being here from Palantir, Zach Kramer from Anduril. We appreciate your time and your expertise and adding to this conversation about what the CDA has been doing over its 4 years of existence. So thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. And have a great day, and Merry Christmas from the Hudson Institute.